Have you ever noticed that when a person begins to change, their surroundings often feel uncomfortable? This is rarely expressed openly. Instead, it manifests in jokes, advice disguised as concern, or awkward silence when deep topics arise. The reason is simple. A person's mental evolution threatens others' comfort zones, and few are willing to confront their own complacency. Perhaps you are experiencing this yourself right now. You've started to think and act differently, perhaps even questioning established truths. And suddenly, you feel alone, misunderstood, or judged. What remains unspoken, but what Nietzsche understood better than anyone, is the price of building a strong mind. Not just strength, but a strength so intense, so authentic, that it makes others uncomfortable, exposing the weakness of those who live on autopilot. Why does this happen? Because a powerful mind is a threat to collective mediocrity, as Nietzsche directly stated. When an individual decides to think for themselves, create their own values, and reject pre-packaged truths, they become dangerous to the system, to those around them, and above all, to their former self. This is a call to those who are tired of being hostages to their own insecurity, who feel an internal rupture and are ready to build something indomitable, a mind that cannot be manipulated, one that terrifies with its unyielding nature. If you are ready for this path, a solitary, difficult, but transformative one, know this. Nietzsche's teachings will confront you with yourself, but they will also liberate you, changing your thinking forever. Nietzsche was not merely a philosopher, but a surgeon of the human soul, a man who dared to gaze into the abyss of existence and immerse himself within it. It was in this internal chaos, which many avoid, that he found the source of true strength. For Nietzsche, a person transforms not in peace, stability, or order, but in pain, downfall, and chaos. He wrote, "One must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." This is not just a metaphor, but a psychological diagnosis. To build an unshakable mind, one must abandon the idea that it will come through comfort, motivation, or positive affirmations. True strength is born when a person faces suffering without fleeing, when they stop asking for an easy life and begin to desire to become stronger. Recall your periods of greatest growth. Was it when everything was going well, or when you were broken, lost, and forced to rebuild yourself? Friedrich Nietzsche held the view that suffering is not an unfortunate accident, but a fundamental force that sets existence in motion. The philosopher did not idealize pain, but saw in it a powerful tool for self-improvement. A person capable of changing their perception of pain, failure, and loneliness begins to forge something exceptional within themselves, an unyielding spirit. It is then that the world begins to show unease, because while most people avoid chaos, the individual learns to exist at its epicenter. While others strive for normalcy and predictability, they forge greatness. However, such a transformation requires a decisive rejection of conventional notions of strength. To be strong does not mean constantly displaying a smile or pretending to control one's emotions. True strength lies in the ability to endure the unbearable and emerge from trials even more hardened. Nietzsche recognized that merely encountering chaos was not enough. Chaos can destroy a person if they lack a strong inner core, a kind of anchor. This is why the philosopher addresses a key point of his philosophy: the death of God, placing the full weight of existential responsibility on humanity. When there is nothing left to rely on, when the heavens are silent, It is within the individual themselves that a universe must be born. In proclaiming God is dead, Nietzsche was not celebrating, but warning. Unfortunately, many still have not grasped the essence of this warning. The philosopher killed not a divine essence as such, but an illusion. The illusion of a higher power that will take care of everything. The illusion of a predestined plan, pre-established meaning, and purpose given from outside. The death of God means the end of all excuses. This is frightening, because previously it was easy to shift responsibility for one's life onto higher powers, comforting oneself. With the belief that everything happens for a reason, that suffering is part of a divine plan, and that ultimately a higher good will justify everything. Nietzsche mercilessly tears away this mask. He looks a person in the face and declares, "You are alone." There is no ready-made meaning, no predetermination. Now man himself is the creator of his own destiny. It is here that the true construction of a strong mind begins. Most people break when they realize they are alone in the face of chaos, without guidance, without guarantees, without anyone to blame. However, those who find the courage to face this reality without breaking begin to forge an unyielding consciousness. With the death of God, Nietzsche casts man into the abyss of radical freedom. There is no longer a need to follow commandments. Now one must create their own values. No longer must one obey. One must transcend oneself. This is the birth of a brutal autonomy, with which comes immense responsibility. Now everything depends solely on the individual. There is no longer absolution, no salvation from outside. Either a person builds themselves, or they perish. However, herein lies the secret. The freedom that is so frightening is the greatest source of strength. When a person realizes that no one is coming to save them, a certain fire awakens within them, forcing them to rise even when bleeding, to think independently, to feel independently, to act not because someone said it was right, but because they themselves decided so. It is in this break from existential crutches that Nietzsche prepares the ground for something even grander. This speaks to the emergence of a fundamentally new type of existence, an individual who rejects conformity and herd mentality, a personality who needs no external approval or permission, who independently forms their own moral principles, a being who transcends their own limitations and lives as a creator. This individual frightens the weak because their example reveals the true nature of those around them. This phenomenon is given a name, the Overman, Übermensch. Friedrich Nietzsche did not believe in the evolution of humanity as a slow and passive process. He was convinced of the necessity of a sudden leap, a radical transformation, a creative destruction. This is why he proposed the concept of the Overman, Übermensch. This is not a comic book hero, nor a character endowed with supernatural abilities. The Overman is a being who has overcome all the shackles that hold the ordinary person. Guilt, blind obedience, herd morality, the need for recognition. The Overman does not seek the approval of others, does not ask permission for their existence. They establish their own internal laws and follow them, even if it sets them against the whole world. This is why their mind becomes unshakable, as it does not depend on the expectations of others. They do not need external validation of their worth. They are self-sufficient. Their driving force is their own will to power, a deep desire to shape reality according to their own will. This is the essence. The overman does not adapt to the world, but rather imbues the world with meaning. They do not seek comfort, they strive for greatness. They do not ask, "Is this allowed?" but rather, "Is this worthy of me?" Such a shift in perspective radically changes everything. When a person begins to see themselves as a creator, not a servant, their thinking, actions, and feelings undergo a complete transformation. However, to become such a being, sacrifices must be made. One will have to destroy within themselves those traits that still crave approval. One will have to face the pain of alienation, bear the burden of independently forming their identity from scratch, without any guarantees, support, or recognition. Most people are incapable of this. They give up before they even start, and return to the safe haven of ready-made beliefs, dogmas, and rules established for them by others. The path to the overman is a path of solitude, and Nietzsche understood this perfectly. He himself lived on the fringes, misunderstood, considered a madman, isolated from the world he tried to liberate. But it was in this isolation that he found his freedom. It is important to realize that the stronger the mind becomes, the further one moves away from the masses, the higher they ascend, and the more discomfort they cause to those around them. Becoming the overman is the most brutal and transformative process a person can experience, for it requires the destruction of everything that is not their true essence, everything that has been imposed by a sick culture, a society that encourages obedience and punishes authenticity. And only after this destruction does creation begin. But this creation does not happen in a crowd, but in silence, in solitude, in the deep loneliness that separates the strong from the weak. To become unshakable, one must learn to walk their path alone, and only a few are ready for this. Paradoxically, the path to mental strength is often accompanied by a profound sense of loneliness. This is not due to a conscious desire for isolation, but rather because the surrounding world loses its bearings when interacting with someone who has attained this strength. Friedrich Nietzsche, a brilliant thinker, shrewdly observed this pattern. The free spirit, who dares to reject accepted moral norms, thinks independently, and does not accept easy truths at face value, is destined for alienation from the herd. This detachment, while certainly painful, is a necessary condition for genuine growth. For personal development requires space, freedom from others' expectations and prejudices. Most people, like invisible sheep, live within a herd where every thought is controlled and every action is judged through the prism of others' opinions. The habit of moving in a group, thinking uniformly, and feeling safe due to the presence of others, all this creates an illusion of comfort. However, Nietzsche offers a fundamentally different path. He tears the individual from this comfort zone and casts them into a merciless desert. In this desert, there are no applause or praises, no guides or mentors. One is left alone with their doubts, traumas, fears, and the desire to surrender. It is here that the true test begins. Most people, unable to bear this tension, try to return, to hide behind familiar masks and pretend they feel nothing, think nothing, and see nothing. However, those who truly strive for unshakable strength must remain and endure the silence that reveals their true essence. Nietzsche asserted, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will often be lonely and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Self-possession, That is the goal, the rarest and most valuable achievement available to humanity. When a person truly possesses themselves, no one can control them, dictate their worth, or break their spirit. However, this possession comes with the burden of loneliness. One loses connections with some people, faces misunderstanding, hears accusations of arrogance, strangeness, and detachment. Those around them try to pull them back into familiar bounds, calling them crazy, cold, and unfeeling. But this is the price for refusing to be domesticated, for refusing to live for applause and to reflect others' needs. The truth is that the inability to tolerate loneliness indicates an unpreparedness for freedom. True freedom implies giving up emotional crutches, convenient illusions, and utilitarian friendships. This is why Nietzsche viewed loneliness as a privilege, a battleground where the true self has the opportunity to fully manifest. However, a free mind does not merely exist in solitude. It gains the ability to see what is inaccessible to others. And this leads to a clash with mediocrity. When a person becomes strong, collective mediocrity senses it and reacts. The world does not persecute those who are no different from others. It persecutes those who dare to stand out. Friedrich Nietzsche, the eminent thinker, feared not the faces of tyrants and despots, but the pervasive influence of collective mediocrity. He philosophically denounced this unseen force that relentlessly suppresses individuality, punishes those who dare to think unconventionally, and elevates conformity, masking cowardice as virtue. According to Nietzsche, true tyranny comes not from rulers, but from society, from the crowd, which demands that individuals remain insignificant so that it itself does not have to evolve. Such a phenomenon is observed when an individual begins to stand out from the general mass. When the mind becomes sharper, the spirit stronger, and the presence more noticeable, it causes discomfort in others, not due to any reprehensible actions, but due to the manifestation of uniqueness. A familiar pattern is disrupted, and society, as is known, does not tolerate those who break these patterns. Collective mediocrity cannot endure individual brilliance, as it exposes the ugliness of ordinary life. Nietzsche called this phenomenon slave morality, a system of values created by those who, unable to achieve greatness, simply decided to invert accepted norms. They declared strength to be arrogance, ambition to be selfishness, and independence to be coldness. Thus, a moral system was formed that supposedly protects the weak and condemns the strong. However, according to the philosopher, this does not stem from compassion, but from envy, as the weak seek not salvation, but the destruction of the strong. This is precisely why, when a person begins to free themselves from the shackles of conformity, they come under attack. Sometimes these attacks are direct and open, and sometimes they are veiled, manifesting in glances, silence, and ironic remarks. But the meaning is always the same. Get back in line. You're making us feel insignificant. At the same time, the person may not even realize they are causing such a reaction, simply by being themselves. Nietzsche deeply understood that most people live in a state of paralyzing conformity, their existence shaped by fear, guilt, and blind obedience. Anyone who dares to question this state of affairs is perceived as a threat. However, make no mistake, mediocrity attacks not with strength, but with numbers, universal consensus, and persistent repetition. It will try to make one doubt themselves, to convince them that they are wrong because they do not fit within the general framework. All means of social pressure will be brought to bear, from shame to complete social exclusion, to make the person bow their head. And it is at this moment that many surrender, unable to bear the burden of being strange, inconvenient, or arrogant. But Nietzsche would have offered a different definition for such a phenomenon. In a world dominated by recycled ideas, contrived desires, and convenient truths, it is the strong individual who can bring the necessary discomfort for something new to be born. Individuality is the spark that can ignite the flame of transformation, but it is also a target for resistance. To be strong, to think freely, and to live independently, these are all acts of war against collective mediocrity. And, like any war, it requires careful preparation and the possession of weapons, not physical, but mental ones. Developing a strong and independent mind is no easy task, but the reward for it is a freedom that no one can take away. The reader's attention has reached an important milestone, which itself sets them apart from the general populace. Most people would not continue reading at the slightest challenge. They would retreat in the face of discomfort, turning away as soon as they realized the presented material was not intended to flatter their ego. This is nothing less than a call addressed to those ready to cast aside convenient illusions and face reality with wide-open eyes. For creating a mind so formidable that it inspires awe is not merely a choice, it is true self-abnegation. Losses are inevitable. The loss of friendships based on superficiality, missed opportunities requiring submission, and the inability to settle for less. However, in return, something truly priceless is gained: inner integrity, crystal clarity, and conscious presence. One begins to notice that most people around them are mired in a half-asleep state, and their clarity frightens them. Their firmness makes them tremble, and their absence is felt louder than the presence of many. This strength does not come from outside. It is not taught in self-help books, nor can it be acquired through memorized phrases or empty affirmations. It is forged in the depths of the soul, in the silence of sleepless nights, in decisions that go unnoticed. It is the result of an unending internal struggle between who one was and who one is becoming. And this war is not destined to end, for truly strong are not those who have won, but those who continue to fight, even when they have the option to stop. Friedrich Nietzsche did not aim to create followers. His goal was to provoke internal upheaval. He wanted people to stop humbling themselves in search of approval, to cease begging for meaning in life, and to stop seeking answers in pre-made systems when they can only be created through blood, sweat, and consciousness. He urged one to become dangerous, not in a cruel sense, but in the sense of rarity. So rare that one's very existence forces others to look in the mirror and confront what they avoid. If something within you has awakened, do not stop. Your presence here means that internal changes have already begun. You must continue to move forward, realizing that you are not alone, but simply ahead of others. And this, of course, is frightening, but at the same time it grants a long-awaited freedom.